Most people run from the sound of the siren. I'm the fool who drives toward it. I've spent 20 years chasing monsters across the plains, thinking I could outrun my own shadows. But when the sky turned that bruised, sickly shade of green over Moore, Oklahoma, I wasn't alone in my truck. I had a kid with a camera and no sense of self-preservation sitting next to me. As the roar of the finger of God tore the world apart above us, I realized I wasn't just chasing the storm anymore. I was trying to save the only thing that made the wind stop howling in my head.
The sky doesn't just turn black when a monster is coming. It turns a bruised, sickly shade of emerald, the color of a deep-sea trench or a dying lung. I've lived my life in that green light. My name is Cade, and for 20 years I've been chasing the things that most men pray will never find them. I've lost a marriage, a house, and a fair bit of my hearing to the roar of the plains, but I never lost the hunger for the chase. Until I met Riley. He was standing on the shoulder of Highway 81, holding a Canon camera like it was a holy relic. Most tourists I see out here have fear in their eyes. He had something else. He had a look of absolute, reckless worship. "You're in the kill zone, kid," I yelled over the rising whistle of the wind as I pulled my reinforced Dodge Ram alongside him. "Get in the truck or get ready to fly. That supercell is recycling, and she's looking for a place to land." He didn't argue. He scrambled into the passenger seat, smelling of rain and cheap coffee. "I'm Riley," he panted, his eyes fixed on the rotating wall cloud to our west. "And I'm not a kid, I'm a photographer." "If you're dead, you're a statistic," I grunted, slamming the truck into gear. "Hold on, this is about to get bumpy." We drove. The radar on my dashboard was a bleeding mess of purples and reds, the hook echo of a classic wedge tornado forming right on our tail. The wind was buffeting the truck, trying to shove us into the ditch, and the rain was coming down in sheets of gray glass.
"Why do you do it?" Riley asked suddenly. He wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking at me. His face was sharp, youthful, but his eyes had the depth of someone who had seen his fair share of storms, even if they weren't the atmospheric kind. "Because the storm is honest," I said, my hands tight on the steering wheel. "It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It just is. And when you're in the middle of it, everything else, the bills, the regrets, the loneliness, it all just gets blown away." "I think you're just looking for a way to feel alive, Cade," he whispered. I didn't have an answer for him, because just then, the world went dark. The rain stopped. That's the most terrifying part of a tornado, the silence right before the hammer falls. The air felt heavy, like it was being sucked out of our lungs by a giant vacuum. Then, a mile to our left, the ground exploded. A wedge, wider than it was tall, dropped out of the clouds. It wasn't a funnel. It was a wall of debris and fury moving with a speed that defied logic. It hit a power line, and the sky lit up with blue electric fire. "Cade!" Riley's voice was small now. "I see it!" I roared, flooring the accelerator. But the wind was ahead of us. A section of a barn roof, torn off like a piece of paper, came spinning through the air. It clipped the front of the truck with a sickening crunch of metal. The steering wheel jerked violently out of my hands. We skidded. The world spun. 1 second we were on the pavement, the next we were sliding sideways through a field of corn, the stalks slapping against the windows like skeletal fingers. We came to a halt in a ditch, the engine dead, the smell of burnt rubber and ozone filling the cabin. I looked at Riley. He was slumped against the door, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple where he'd hit the glass. "Riley, move!" I grabbed his arm, shaking him. The sound was coming now, the sound of 1,000 freight trains, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my very teeth. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Cade? What happened?" "The truck's dead. We can't stay here. Look!" I pointed toward the farmhouse 50 yards away. It was an old, weathered thing, but it had what we needed, a concrete slab with a heavy iron ring, a storm cellar. "We have to run," I shouted. I hauled him out of the truck. The wind was so strong I had to lean into it at a 45-degree angle just to stay upright. Riley was stumbling, his camera bag still clutched to his chest. I didn't care about the cameras. I didn't care about the truck. I I grabbed his hand, my fingers interlacing with his, and for a split second, the heat of his skin was the only real thing in a world turning to dust. We reached the cellar just as the first shingles began to fly off the farmhouse. I yanked the iron ring. The heavy metal doors groaned, fighting me, but I put every ounce of my desperation into the pull. "Get in! Down the stairs!" I shoved him into the darkness and dived in after him, pulling the doors shut just as the roar became absolute. The bolts slammed home, and then the house above us simply ceased to exist. The sound of the world ending was surprisingly personal. Above us, the farmhouse was being shredded, the scream of nails pulling from wood, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of debris striking the heavy iron doors of our cellar, and a roar so deep it vibrated in the marrow of my bones. But inside the cellar, it was a different kind of intensity. It was small, damp, and smelled of ancient earth, fear. I have Riley pinned against the back wall, my body acting as a secondary shield. I could feel the frantic hummingbird beat of his heart against my chest. He was shaking, not with the cold of the mountain we'd faced before, but with the raw adrenaline of a man who had stared into the eye of a god and lived. "Cade," he whispered, his voice cracking. I can't hear anything but the wind." "Don't listen to the wind," I growled, pressing my forehead against his to ground him. "Listen to me. We're in the concrete. The doors are bolted. You're safe. I've got you." I pulled a small penlight from my pocket and clicked it on. The beam was weak, cutting through the thick dust that filtered down from the floorboards above, but it was enough to see his face. He looked terrified, but there was a spark in his eyes. A realization that the perfect shot he'd been chasing wasn't nearly as important as the hand gripping his shoulder. "I thought I wanted to see it," Riley said, his breath hitching. "The power of it. I thought if I could capture it, I'd finally feel like I was worth something, like I wasn't just small." I looked at him, really looked at him. In the shadows of that hole, I saw the kid who had been told he was too soft, the photographer who was always on the outside looking in. I saw myself 20 years ago, before the storms had hardened me into a man who didn't know how to stay still. "You're not small, Riley," I said, my voice dropping into that low, gravelly register that always seems to quiet the room. "The storm is big, yeah, but it's empty. It destroys because it has nothing else. You create. You see the beauty in the chaos. That takes more courage than I'll ever have." He reached up, his fingers trembling as he touched the heavy canvas of my jacket. "You stayed. You could have driven faster. You could have left me on that highway." "I don't leave people behind," I said, though the truth was deeper than that. I couldn't have left him. From the moment he stepped into my truck, the air had changed. It wasn't just the barometric pressure. It was him. As the roar above began to fade into a series of jagged, dying groans, the silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. We were still huddled together, our breath mingling in the dark. The adrenaline was receding, leaving behind a raw, exposed heat. Riley moved first. He didn't pull away. He leaned in. His lips brushed mine, a tentative, questioning ghost of a kiss. It tasted of dust and copper, and it was the most honest thing I'd felt in a decade. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arms around his waist, pulling him flush against me, returning the kiss with a desperate hunger. In that cellar, with the ruins of a life scattered above us, I found the only shelter that mattered. The storm had taken the house, the truck, and the road, but it had given me this. "Cade," he breathed against my lips, his hands tangling in the hair at the back of my neck. "If we get out of here." "When," I corrected him, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes. "When we get out. You're coming with me. No more chasing monsters alone." The silence grew longer, more peaceful. The eye of the heart had found us, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't want to run. The silence was the scariest part. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the sound of a world that had been hollowed out. I reached up and shoved against the iron cellar doors. They didn't budge. "Cade?" Riley's voice was steady now, but I could hear the underlying tremor. "Debris," I grunted, putting my shoulder into the metal. "The house is on top of us. Help me." Together, we shoved. With a screech of twisting timber and a spray of shattered glass, the doors gave way. I climbed out first, reaching back to haul Riley up into the light. We didn't recognize the world. The farmhouse was a pile of splintered toothpicks. My truck, my pride and joy, was wrapped around a headless oak tree 100 yards away, like a piece of discarded tin foil. The golden wheat fields were gone, replaced by a brown, churned-up scar in the earth. But the sky was a mocking, brilliant shade of violet and gold. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows over the carnage. Riley stood beside me, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck. He looked at the ruins of my life, then he looked at me. "I'm so sorry, Cade. Everything you had, it's gone." I looked at the truck. I looked at the debris. Then I looked at the man whose hand was still trembling, the man I'd held in the dark while the world screamed. I reached out, my rough fingers catching his jaw, turning his face toward mine. "I spent 20 years collecting things to fill the silence, Riley," I said, my voice thick with a truth I was finally ready to admit. "The truck, the gear, the trophies, it was all just noise. I didn't lose anything today that can't be replaced, but I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Riley's eyes softened, the violet light of the sunset reflecting in them. "A reason to stop running?" "A reason to stay," I corrected. I leaned down and kissed him, right there in the middle of the wreckage. It wasn't a desperate kiss of survival this time. It was a promise. It was the sound of the wind finally dying down for good. We started walking, not toward the storm, but toward the distant lights of a rescue crew already cresting the hill. We were covered in dust, bruised and technically homeless, but as I draped my arm over Riley's shoulder, I realized I'd never felt more grounded. The chase was over. The life was just beginning. Sometimes, the storm doesn't come to destroy your life. It comes to clear a path for a new one. Cade and Riley found their peace in the eye of the monster, proving that even when the world is torn apart, love is the only thing that remains standing. If you believe in second chances and the power of a love that can weather any storm, help us reach our goal. We are 250 subscribers away from our milestone here at Gay Stories Chronicles. Hit that subscribe button, join the family, and I have one last question for you. If you lost everything today, your home, your car, your possessions, who is the one person you'd hope was standing in the wreckage with you? Tell me their name or why they're the one in the comments. I'll be there to listen.